She had barely taken 2 steps down the crowded supermarket aisle when the sharp pain cut through her abdomen, stealing her breath and sending her sprawling to the floor. Shoppers froze, whispers rising. But the only person she looked for, the one who should have rushed to her, stood stone-faced with his hands in his pockets. Her husband glanced at her trembling form, then turned away as if she were an inconvenience blocking the aisle. Her vision blurred, fear tightening around her unborn child as strangers hesitated, unsure what to do. But one person didn't hesitate. Her grandfather, a man the city once feared and respected in equal measure, stepped forward, and what followed would expose cruelty, rewrite loyalties, and shake their entire world. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your presence here truly means more than you know, and your support helps keep these stories alive. The supermarket buzzed with the usual noise of clattering carts and murmured conversations as Lily moved slowly through the produce aisle, one hand resting gently on her 7-month belly. She had felt a strange pressure since morning, a tightness she kept hoping would fade as the day went on. But each step made her breathing a little heavier. Her husband, Darren, walked a few feet ahead, scrolling on his phone, barely glancing back to see if she kept up. Lily paused near the apples, exhaling shakily as a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, making the lights blur into streaks of white. She whispered his name, her voice soft and strained. T didn't look up, not even when she reached out a trembling hand toward his jacket. She tried to steady herself on the cart, but the pain sharpened without warning, slicing through her abdomen like a hot blade. Her knees buckled. The cart slipped from her grasp, and she collapsed onto the cold supermarket floor. Gasps rippled through the aisle as shoppers froze, unsure whether to approach or to call for help. A mother pulled her child close. An elderly man whispered, "Oh dear," and a teenager fumbled for his phone with shaking hands. Lily lay curled on her side, clutching her belly as tears slid down her cheeks, her senses blurring between fear for herself and terror for her. And then, finally, Darren turned around. He saw her on the floor, trembling, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. For a moment, his brows lifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face, but it disappeared just as quickly. He slipped his phone into his pocket, walked toward her slowly, and stopped a few feet away as if she were a mess he didn't want to step in. "Lily," he said flatly, "you're making a scene." A woman nearby gasped at his tone, her hand flying to her mouth as she watched the interaction unfold. Lily reached toward him, her hand shaking, pleading without words. "Darren, please. It hurts," she whispered. "Something's wrong." But he sighed, rubbing his forehead with the frustration of a man inconvenienced during a quick errand. "It's probably nothing," he muttered. "You always overreact. Get up, people are staring." His voice carried just enough for the crowd to hear, drawing murmurs of disbelief from strangers who could hardly process the cruelty in his tone. Lily's breath hitched as another wave of pain crashed over her, and she clutched her stomach, her tears falling faster. A store employee rushed over, kneeling beside her with genuine panic in his voice. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance?" Lily opened her mouth to answer, but Darren cut in sharply. "No, she doesn't need an ambulance. She just needs to calm down." The employee frowned deeply as he glanced up at the husband, who seemed more irritated than concerned. Then another contraction hit stronger, fiercer, making Lily cry out as her fingers dug into the tile floor. The sound pierced the aisle like a warning siren, making the onlookers step back in shock. The employee glared at Darren. "Sir, she's in real pain. I'm calling for help." Darren rolled his eyes and stepped back, distancing himself from the scene entirely. "Fine," he muttered. "Do what you want. I'm done arguing." And then, to the horror of everyone watching, He began to walk away slow. Steady steps down the aisle as his pregnant wife writhed behind him. "Sir." A shopper yelled after him. "What is wrong with you?" But Darren didn't turn around. Not once. Lily felt her heart shatter in a way the contractions could never mimic, painful, raw, suffocating. "Please, don't leave," she whispered weakly, reaching toward him with the last of her strength. But he disappeared around the corner, without hesitation, without fear, without love. The store employee grabbed his walkie-talkie urgently. "We need medical assistance in aisle 6, now." Several people rushed to help, offering jackets, water, anything to comfort the trembling woman on the floor. Lily's vision dimmed, the edges darkening as the world around her blurred into muffled echoes. And just before she lost consciousness, she heard a familiar voice, deep, steady, and filled with both fury and concern, calling her name in a way that sliced through the chaos. Lily. Lily, her grandfather, had arrived. The aisle erupted into motion the moment Lily's grandfather rushed in, his heavy boots striking the floor with the certainty of a man who had seen too many emergencies to freeze now. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, his granddaughter curled on the floor, trembling, surrounded by strangers who looked frightened and helpless. Something inside him hardened instantly, a quiet fury rising beneath the surface of his calm exterior. "Lily," he said softly, kneeling beside her as his weathered hand cupped her cheek, grounding her in the middle of her spiraling panic. Her eyelids fluttered as she tried to focus on him, desperation coloring her voice. "Grandpa, it hurts. He left me," she whispered, her breath shaking with each word. His jaw tightened, the veins along his temple pulsing with restrained anger. "I'm here now," he murmured, lowering his forehead to hers in a gesture of deep reassurance. "You're safe. I've got you." He turned sharply toward the nearest employee, his voice rising with command. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" The young man nodded nervously. "Yes, sir. They're on their way. 2 minutes out." Her grandfather, Henry Lawson, a retired firefighter with decades of crisis behind him, carefully lifted Lily's upper body into his arms, creating a makeshift cradle so she could breathe easier. "Talk to me, sweetheart," he said steadily. "Where is the pain? How long has it been happening?" Lily winced as another strong contraction seized her midsection, forcing her to grip his sleeve tightly. "Since this morning," she whispered. "But it got worse here, Darren." He said, "I was overreacting." The way she said her husband's name, broken, humiliated maid, Henry's expression darkened with a rage so deep it could have ignited the air around him. "Where is he?" Henry asked tightly. "Where is that man now?" Several onlookers exchanged unsettled glances before a teenager pointed down the aisle. "He walked away," the boy said quietly. "He didn't want to help her." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering in disbelief. Henry's chest rose with a slow, measured breath, one he'd learned to take when confronting firefighters who froze during a call, or civilians who endangered others by panicking. But this wasn't panic. This was abandonment. And it was unforgivable. He forced his attention back to Lily as the sirens grew louder outside, echoing through the automatic doors. "Stay with me," he whispered, brushing her hair away from her sweaty forehead. "I know it hurts. I know. Just breathe with me. We're going to get you help." Lily whimpered softly, her nails digging into his arm. Needing him more now than she had in years, paramedics burst into the store moments later, their stretcher wheels rattling across the tiles as they pushed through the crowd. "Patient is 28 years old, 7 months pregnant," a worker reported quickly. "Severe abdominal pain, possible contractions, dizzy, collapsed." Henry stepped aside just enough to give them room while still supporting Lily's back with one hand. Blood pressure elevated dangerously, pulse rapid and unstable. The lead paramedic knelt beside Lily, speaking gently. Ma'am, we're going to take you to the hospital. You and the baby are our priority right now. Can you hear me? Lily nodded weakly, tears slipping down her cheeks. My husband, she whispered, the heartbreak cracking her voice. Henry placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. You don't worry about him right now, he said firmly. Worry about yourself and this little one. I'll handle the rest. The stretcher was lowered beside her, and with coordinated hands, the paramedics lifted her carefully onto it. Lily whimpered as the movement triggered another spasm of pain. But Henry stayed right beside her, holding her hand tightly until she was secured. Stay with her, the lead paramedic told him. She's in active distress. Henry nodded once, already moving to follow the stretcher through the checkout lines and out into the bright, chaotic parking lot. The ambulance doors swung open, and Lily was loaded inside with efficiency born of training and urgency. Only one family member can ride along, a paramedic said. Henry stepped in without hesitation. She's my granddaughter, he said, and I'm not leaving her side. Inside the ambulance, as the doors closed and the siren started, Lily clung weakly to his hand. Grandpa, she whispered, I'm scared. Henry squeezed her hand tightly, his voice firm but comforting. I know, sweetheart, but listen, to me nothing will happen to you. Not while I'm breathing. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, he glanced at her pale face, then at her trembling hand resting atop her belly. A protective force, one he hadn't felt since the days he carried people out of burning buildings. Rose inside him like a second heartbeat, but beneath that fierce protectiveness, something else simmered, a deep, simmering fury at the man who left her on a supermarket floor. Darren had crossed a line. A line Henry Lawson would make sure he would regret. And the world was about to see what happened when a grandfather who once ran into fires decided to become one. The ambulance screeched into the hospital bay with an urgency that made staff rush forward, swinging open doors and guiding Lily's stretcher inside. Henry stayed beside her, his large hand wrapped around her trembling fingers as they moved through bright hallways filled with controlled chaos. Nurses shouted vitals, doctors assessed her condition, and monitors lit up with beeping alarms that made Henry's heart pound in ways no fire ever had. Lily winced as she was transferred to a hospital bed. Her breath shallow, her eyelids fluttering with pain she tried desperately to hide. Focus on my voice, sweetheart, Henry murmured, leaning close to steady her spiraling fear. You're strong. You're here. They're helping you now. Lily's lips quivered, and she whispered, Don't leave, with the desperation of a child. Henry squeezed her hand tighter. I won't. Not for a second. A nurse tugged him gently aside. Sir, we need a bit of space. She's in active distress, and we need to monitor the baby immediately. Henry nodded, stepping back just enough to let them work, but refusing to move farther than an arm's length. His jaw clenched as he watched Lily writhe, every instinct inside him begging to trade places with her if only he could. And then the door slammed open. Darren walked in, not running, not panicked, not ashamed. He strolled in with a stiff, defensive posture of a man annoyed at being inconvenienced, his eyes flicking across the room before settling on Lily with a performative gasp. Lily, he said loudly, why didn't you tell me it was serious? Nurses glanced at one another, sensing the shift in air as Henry's entire body turned rigid. Henry stepped forward, blocking Darren's path with a stance so solid it could have stopped a moving truck. You, Henry said quietly, don't get to act concerned now. Darren blinked, feigning confusion. I came as soon as the store called me, he lied. I didn't know she was in this much pain. From the bed, Lily's voice cracked like thin glass. You walked away, she whispered, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. I begged you not to leave me, and you walked away. A nurse paused mid-task, her mouth tightening as she realized the truth was now spilling out into the cold. Sterile room. Darren's expression twitched annoyance, flashing before he covered it with practiced innocence. "I didn't want to crowd you," he said smoothly. "You always panic during small things. I thought giving you space would help." Henry's eyes widened, disbelief breaking into fury that ran hot and sharp. "Small things," Henry echoed. "She collapsed in front of you. She cried for help. And your response was to walk away." Darren bristled, stepping an inch too close, his voice lowering defensively. "You don't understand our marriage. She exaggerates everything. I was going to come back." Lily released a soft, heartbroken sob. "No," she whispered. "You weren't." A nurse stepped between them now, her voice firm. "Sir, she needs calm. You are upsetting the patient. I'm going to have to ask you to step outside if you can't control yourself." Darren scoffed, lifting his hands in surrender. "Fine. If everyone wants to blame me, go ahead. But she's my wife. I have every right to be here." Henry breathed slowly through his nose, grounding himself the way he once did before charging into burning buildings. "That right," he said steadily, "is earned by protecting her. Not abandoning her." Darren's jaw flexed with irritation, but Henry's stare didn't waver. A doctor entered then, scanning the chart quickly before glancing at Lily with a softened expression. "Her vitals are stabilizing. The baby is responding well. But she needs a stress-free environment for at least 24 hours. He turned toward Darren pointedly. "That includes removing any sources of distress." Darren stiffened. "Are you implying?" Henry cut him off, stepping forward with silent authority. "You heard the doctor." For a moment, Darren tried to stare him down, but standing before Henry Lawson, retired firefighter and lifelong protector, was like trying to intimidate a mountain. The tension broke when Henry took one deliberate step closer. "Out," Henry murmured. Darren froze. Something in Henry's tone, quiet, razor-focused, absolute, cut deeper than any shout. And with that, Darren slowly backed out of the room while nurses watched with barely concealed disapproval. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Henry to return to Lily's bedside. He sat down, taking her shaking hand gently. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I'm here, and he will answer for this." Lily closed her eyes, letting the first breath of relief wash through her. This was only the beginning. But Henry Lawson had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Darren barely made it 3 steps down the hallway before the mask of composure he wore inside Lily's room shattered like thin glass. His expression twisted with anger, humiliation, and a desperation he didn't yet understand how to control. He slammed his fist against the wall, the bang echoing sharply through the corridor and drawing startled looks from nurses passing by. One of the nurses paused, narrowing her eyes. "Sir, you need to calm down," she warned gently yet firmly. "This is a hospital. We can't have disturbances." Darren turned toward her with a hostile glare, teeth clenched, voice tight with a forced calm that only made his rage more visible. "Everyone keeps acting like I'm the problem," he hissed. "I'm her husband. I'm trying to help." Henry stepped out of Lily's room just in time to hear that. He moved into the hallway with a steadiness that instantly altered the atmosphere, as though a quiet force pushed the tension down with invisible hands. Darren stiffened when he saw him, attempting to straighten his posture as if he were the one in control. "You can glare all you want," Darren said coldly. "But you don't speak for Lily. I do." Henry tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing with a calm that held the weight of decades of leadership and crisis. "You don't speak for anyone," he replied softly, "especially not the woman you left on the floor to suffer." Darren scoffed loudly. "This again. I didn't abandon her. I went to get help." Nurses exchanged skeptical glances. Henry stepped closer, his voice dropping low. You walked away. Darren opened his mouth to retort, but footsteps approached quickly from behind a hospital security officer. Tall and composed, responding to the earlier noise. "Is there a problem here?" the officer asked, scanning the hallway carefully. Darren gestured wildly toward Henry. "Yeah. He thinks he owns this hospital. He's trying to push me out of my wife's care." The officer turned toward Henry, who remained calm and still. "Is everything okay, sir?" Henry nodded once. "I'm fine. He's the one causing disruption." Darren's temper snapped. "Oh, for God's sake, she's my wife," he shouted, his voice echoing like a breaking dam. Patients down the hall stirred. A nurse hurried forward to quiet the area. The officer stepped between them immediately. "Sir, lower your voice. This is your final warning." Darren threw his hands up in a dramatic, bitter gesture. Unbelievable. First, my wife, now everyone else siding with him. He's not even her father. The officer's eyes sharpened, assessing the situation with practiced judgment. "It doesn't matter who he is calm, you are not." Henry took a step forward, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I raised that girl from the time she was 7, he said. "Her parents were never around. I held her when she had nightmares. I taught her how to ride a bike. I bandaged her knees. And last night, I carried her into that ambulance while you walked away." His voice tightened with controlled emotion. "I may not be her father. I have earned the right to protect her." Darren froze. Even the officer stilled, taken aback by the quiet force of Henry's words. Henry continued, voice steady as steel. "And right now, protection means keeping you far from her." Darren's face twisted, anger and insecurity warring inside him. "You don't know anything," he snarled. "You have no idea what she's been like lately. She's been needy, dramatic, impossible to deal with. I can't breathe around her sometimes." A nearby nurse sucked in a breath, stunned. Henry stared at him with a kind of sorrowful anger that cut deeper than rage. "She is 7 months pregnant," Henry said quietly, "and scared, and in pain. If that suffocates you, that's not her failing. It's yours." The officer stepped forward again, clearly reaching his limit. "Sir, unless you calm down, you'll be escorted off the property." Darren clenched his fists, breathing hard, desperately trying to swallow the rising panic. "Fine," he snapped. "I'll wait outside. I'm not leaving until I talk to her." Henry watched him go, but something about Darren's words stuck with him, the tone, the deflection, the desperation. He turned to the nearest nurse. "Has she had any other incidents recently? Fainting? Pain? Anything she might have hidden?" The nurse hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She came in 2 weeks ago. Dizzy, lightheaded. Low blood pressure. She seemed anxious. When I asked if anything at home was stressing her, she just said, 'Everything's fine.' But her eyes said something else." Henry's jaw clenched. Pieces were starting to fall into place, pieces Lily never allowed herself to speak aloud. He thanked the nurse with a respectful nod, then turned back toward Lily's room, carrying with him a growing certainty. This wasn't just a collapse. This wasn't just stress. There was something darker beneath. It's something he was determined to uncover, protect Lily from, and end for good. And Darren, pacing outside with fury and panic, had no idea that Henry Lawson was already unraveling the truth, piece by piece. Henry stepped back into Lily's dim hospital room, closing the door softly behind him as the monitors hummed with steady rhythm. She lay propped up against the pillows, her face pale but calmer now that the nurses had stabilized her. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes softened with relief, but fear lingered like a shadow behind the glass. He pulled a chair beside her bed, lowering himself slowly, his voice gentle. "How are you feeling now, sweetheart?" Lily placed a trembling hand over her belly, exhaling shakily as she nodded. "Better, not great, but better." The pain eased a little. Henry brushed her hair away from her forehead, noticing the exhaustion written in the tiny tremors of her fingers. "Good," he murmured. "You rest now. Let them handle your vitals." But Lily shook her head, her lips parting with a quiet urgency. "Grandpa, you need to know something." Henry leaned forward, his heartbeat tightening with concern. "Tell me," he said softly. She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears that she tried to blink away. "This wasn't the first time I felt dizzy," she whispered. "It wasn't just today. I've been feeling faint for weeks." Her voice cracked as she continued. "And every time." Darren said I was exaggerating. A sharp ache pierced Henry's chest, anger rising like a slow-burning flame. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked gently, not accusing aching. Lily stared at her hands, her voice trembling with shame she didn't deserve. "I didn't want to worry you. And Darren said stress was bad for the baby, so I tried to stay calm. I thought maybe I really was being dramatic." Henry shook his head slowly, his voice breaking. "No, sweetheart, you weren't dramatic, you were hurting. And he ignored you." Lily pressed her palms to her eyes as tears slipped through her fingers, her sob muffled and fragile. "I felt so alone," she whispered. "I was scared something was wrong with the baby." Before Henry could respond, there was a soft knock on the door as a nurse stepped inside with a clipboard. "Mr. Lawson, may I speak with you for a moment?" Her tone carried both hesitance and concern, signaling something important. Henry rose and followed her just outside the room, leaving the door cracked slightly behind him. The nurse exhaled, lowering her voice. "We ran Lily's preliminary blood work," she said. "Her iron is dangerously low. She's severely anemic." That alone could have caused the collapse. Henry's face hardened, the puzzle pieces snapping together with chilling clarity. "Was this recent?" he asked. The nurse nodded. "Her levels dropped drastically in the last month." Henry inhaled sharply, the implications chilling him to the bone. Low iron, constant stress, collapse, Darren's neglect. The nurse continued quietly. "I asked if she had been taking her supplements. She said she ran out about 2 weeks ago, and that she asked her husband to buy more." Henry's stomach twisted as he asked, "Did she tell you whether he did?" The nurse met his gaze with a sorrowful shake of her head. She said he forgot. Several times. Henry closed his eyes, forgot or ignored, or simply didn't care. Inside the room, Lily looked toward them anxiously, seeing the tension in their posture even from a distance. Henry stepped back in, his expression gentle but lined with sadness. She opened her mouth, but he lifted a hand to her cheek, steadying her trembling breath. "You didn't collapse because you're weak," Henry said softly. "You collapsed because you weren't getting what your body needed, and you asked for help." Lily's breath shook as she whispered, but he didn't listen. Before Henry could answer, the door swung open with abrupt force. Darren stormed back inside. His hair was disheveled, eyes bloodshot, posture unraveling. Panic and anger clung to him like a fever. "What are you two whispering about?" he demanded. "Why is everyone treating me like the villain?" Lily stiffened instantly, her pulse monitor spiking in a nervous rhythm. Henry moved smoothly between them, shielding Lily with a calm that made Darren falter. "Lower your voice," Henry warned. "She needs calm." Darren ignored him, stepping sideways as if to circle around the barrier Henry's body created. "Lily," he said, voice trembling, "you're letting him twist everything." Lily's voice quivered. "Darren, please stop." But Darren shook his head violently, his tone rising in frantic desperation. "You're making me look like a monster." Henry stepped closer, grounding the moment with a sharp, controlled breath. "You don't need help looking like a monster," he said quietly. "You manage that all by yourself." Darren's face contorted in rage as he jabbed a finger toward Henry's chest. "You've poisoned her against me for years. She was happy before you started interfering." Henry didn't flinch, didn't move, he simply stared through Darren like glass. "Son, if you think abandonment is love, you've been living in the dark." A nurse rushed in, alerted by the raised voices and the spike in Lily's heart rate. "Sir, you need to leave," she said firmly. "You're causing medical distress." Darren's breath grew shallow, emotions spiraling beyond logic. "I'm her husband," he shouted again. "I have the right to be here." Henry's voice dropped into deadly calm. "You had the right," he said, "before you walked away from her in pain." Darren froze. A silence fell across the room, heavy, suffocating. The nurse signaled hospital security, who appeared moments later at the door, assessing the tense scene instantly. "Sir," one guard said, "you need to step outside now." Darren's shoulders sagged as fear finally cracked through his anger. He backed away slowly, eyes darting between Lily and Henry. "This isn't over," he muttered. "We're talking about this. Both of you." Henry watched him go with a steady, unreadable expression. The door closed. The room exhaled. Lily released a trembling sob, covering her face with both hands. Henry sat beside her again, taking her shaking hand into his own. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "I need you to tell me everything. All of it. I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to protect you." Lily stared at him, eyes filled with fear and exhaustion, and finally, the truth she'd carried alone for far too long. She whispered the words with a broken voice that made Henry's heart stop. "Grandpa, he hasn't been this cruel for just one day. It's been happening for months." And with that shattered confession, the real story began. Henry felt the air in the room shift as Lily's confession lingered between them, heavy and trembling, like a secret begging to be released after being held too tightly for too long. He moved his chair closer, lowering himself until he was level with her eyes, giving her the space to speak without fear. Lily's breath shook as she clutched the blanket, her fingers twisting it with the nervousness of someone about to tear open months of hidden pain. "Tell me, sweetheart," Henry said softly, his voice carrying the same steady warmth he used when she was a child. "Whatever it is, you're safe now. I need to know so I can help you." Lily's eyes glistened, widening with uncertainty before finally softening in surrender. She inhaled shakily, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "It started small," Lily whispered, staring down at her hands as though they carried the memories. "He would tell me I was too emotional, too sensitive. That pregnancy made me dramatic. And when I cried, he said I was manipulating him." Her voice cracked, barely able to hold the weight of her own words. "At first, I believed him. I thought maybe I really was too much." Henry's heart tightened. He had seen this pattern before in others he'd helped during crisis calls, gaslighting, minimizing, twisting vulnerability into an accusation. He reached out, gently holding her hand. "You weren't too much," he said, firmly. Lily nodded weakly, swallowing hard. "Then it got worse," she continued, her breath trembling. "He stopped coming home early. He'd leave his phone face down. He said I was stressing him out. And when I started getting dizzy, he said it was all in my head." Tears spilled again as she whispered, "I begged him to buy my supplements. He just never did." Henry inhaled slowly, grounding his fury deep in his chest. "Did he ever hurt you, Lily?" he asked, voice steady but weighted. She hesitated too long, too telling. Her lips parted, but the words came out fragile, unsure. "Not with his hands," she murmured. "But he pushed me emotionally so far down that I couldn't breathe." Henry closed his eyes momentarily, absorbing the truth with a quiet devastation. Emotional abuse left no bruises, yet its wounds bled deeper. But he wasn't done asking, not until he understood everything. "Did he ever threaten you?" Henry asked gently. "Or the baby?" Lily shook her head quickly, fear flashing behind her eyes. No, not directly." She hesitated again. "But he said if I kept acting like this, he couldn't be the father the baby needed." that it was my fault he was pulling away. Henry's jaw tightened until the muscles ached. Darren didn't need fists. His words were weapons sharpened by manipulation. Lily wiped her eyes again, her voice dropping into a trembling whisper. Grandpa, he stopped sleeping in the same room. He didn't touch me, didn't ask how I was feeling. And when I told him, I felt like something was wrong with the baby. He rolled his eyes. She pressed a hand to her face as quiet sobs shook her. I thought marriage meant support. I thought I was supposed to hold on. Henry leaned forward, brushing a tear from her cheek with gentle fingers. Marriage is a partnership, he said softly. Not a cage. She looked up at him, then broken, exhausted, but desperately seeking a place to rest her truth. I didn't know who else to tell, she whispered. He always said people would think I was overreacting, and I didn't want anyone to think badly of him. Henry's breath caught in his throat, a father figure, hearing a granddaughter defend the man who was slowly destroying her. Sweetheart, he whispered, voice cracking in its own heartbreak. People would have helped you. I would have helped you. She nodded slowly, regret shimmering through her tears. I know that now. I just didn't want to disappoint anyone. Henry placed both hands on her shoulders, grounding her gently but with absolute certainty. You have never disappointed me, he said firmly. Not once, not ever. The only person who failed here is him. Lily's face crumpled as she buried her face in her hands, releasing a sob that carried months of silent pain. Henry gently wrapped his arms around her shoulders, letting her cry against him the way she did when she was small, when monsters hid under her bed instead of beside her. After a long moment, Lily pulled away slightly, wiping her face as she caught her breath. Grandpa, she whispered, voice small but brave. What happens now? What am I supposed to do? Henry exhaled slowly, leaning back just enough to look her directly in the eyes. We protect you, he said. We protect that baby. And we make sure Darren never gets the chance to hurt either of you again. Lily swallowed hard. But he's my husband. Henry shook his head gently. He is the man you married, he corrected softly. But that man is not the man he chose to become. Before she could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. A nurse peeked in, glancing toward Lily with a compassionate expression. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Lily's latest labs are in, and the doctor wants to speak with you both. Henry stood, squeezing Lily's hand as she nodded weakly. A storm of truth had been released. And now the consequences would begin to take shape. Outside in the hallway, Darren sat slumped in a chair, pacing anxiously. Eyes darting every time someone walked past, panic growing, desperation tightening, frustration simmering. He had no idea his lies, neglect, and cruelty had just been stripped bare. No idea what Lily had finally admitted. No idea Henry was now moving with the determination of a man who had rescued strangers from burning buildings and was prepared to rescue his granddaughter from a burning marriage. The turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The doctor entered the room with a clipboard pressed tightly against his chest, his expression carrying the calm seriousness of someone who had delivered difficult news far too many times. Henry rose instinctively, positioning himself beside Lily as the doctor approached the bed, offering a gentle nod before speaking. Lily, he said softly, we've reviewed your labs and performed additional monitoring. I want to explain a few things. Lily's breath trembled, and Henry placed a steadying hand over hers, grounding her against the rising tension. The doctor continued carefully. You're severely anemic, dangerously so. Your iron levels are extremely low, which can cause fainting, stress on the baby, and complications if not treated immediately. Lily blinked rapidly, absorbing the information like cold water hitting her skin. We also noticed elevated cortisol levels, the doctor added. Your body has been under significant stress for quite some time. That combination likely caused your collapse today. Henry's jaw tightened as Lily's fingers curled into the blanket, her shoulders folding inward as if trying to hide from the reality of her own suffering. Then the doctor hesitated just slightly before saying the words that pierced the room like a blade. "This didn't develop overnight. This has been building for weeks, possibly months. You've been struggling far longer than you realized." Lily released a small, fragile sob as the truth settled over her. Henry exhaled painfully, his heart twisting with guilt for not seeing the signs earlier. "I tried," Lily whispered. I kept telling myself it was normal." The doctor's voice softened. "There's nothing normal about collapsing alone on a supermarket floor," he said gently. "You need rest, supplements, monitoring, and a calm environment. No stress, no conflict." Henry nodded slowly, absorbing each instruction like mission orders from his firefighting days. Then something shifted in the doctor's posture, a deeper concern, a hesitation that carried weight. "There is one more thing," he said quietly. "We need to ask about your home environment, or your safety and the baby's." Lily's eyes widened as shame and fear flooded her expression. Henry stepped closer, his voice firm. "Doctor, you can ask anything you need. I'm here." Before the doctor could continue, the door swung open abruptly. Darren stormed in again, his face flushed with agitation, sweat clinging to his forehead as if he'd been pacing relentlessly. "Why wasn't I told about the test results?" he snapped, glaring at the doctor. "I'm her husband. I should be the first to know everything." Lily flinched at the sharp tone, and the monitor beside her beat faster. Henry stepped between them instantly, his presence a protective wall Darren couldn't breach. "You were told to wait outside," Henry said, voice dangerously calm. "You didn't listen." Darren ignored him, trying to peer over Henry's shoulder toward Lily. "What's going on? What are they telling you? Are you letting him twist things again?" His voice quivered with insecurity disguised as anger, his agitation rising with every unanswered question. The doctor held up a hand firmly. "Sir, you need to lower your voice. Your wife needs a stress-free environment. Her condition is serious." Darren scoffed, throwing his arms up in frustration. "Everything is serious to her. She has been overreacting since the day she got pregnant." Lily's face crumpled. Henry's eyes darkened. The doctor's expression hardened. "Enough," Henry said, his voice low, so low it felt like the quiet rumble before a storm. "You have done nothing today but endanger her. You ignored her pain, dismissed her fear, and now you're disrupting her treatment." Darren's fists clenched. "I didn't endanger anyone." "Stop acting like I'm the villain," he shouted, the pitch of his voice cracking at the edges. A nurse hurried to the door, peeking in nervously at the commotion. The doctor stepped forward now, professionalism giving way to urgency. "Sir, if you don't calm down, security will escort you out. This is your only warning." Darren's breathing grew ragged, his eyes darting wildly between Lily, Henry, and the doctor, caught between fear of losing control and desperation to seem in control. "I need to talk to her," he insisted. "Alone, without everyone poisoning her against me." Lily shook her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I don't want to be alone with you," she whispered. Darren froze. The words hit him harder than any punch could have. His face paled as the reality finally cracked open wide enough for him to see. She wasn't afraid of Henry. She was afraid of him. Suddenly, like a drowning man clawing at the surface, Darren lunged forward. "Lily, please," he choked out, reaching for her. But Henry grabbed his arm mid-movement, stopping him with immovable force. Darren stared up at him, breath shaking, eyes filling with something dark panic, mixing with possessiveness. Henry leaned closer, his voice quiet but deadly focused. "You will not touch her." Security stormed in moments later, alerted by the spike in Lily's monitors and the raised voices. The guards positioned themselves around Darren, one speaking firmly. "Sir, you need to come with us. You're causing medical harm." Darren yanked his arm away, but even he knew he'd crossed a line too far to hide. "You can't take her from me," he spat, pointing at Henry with trembling fingers. "You can't just replace me." Henry straightened, calm and steady. "You replaced yourself," he said. The words punched Darren back to silence. He was escorted out, breathless and shaking, protesting weakly as the hallway swallowed him in shame and fear. When the door finally closed, Lily broke down into sobs, covering her face with both hands. Henry rushed to her side, holding her gently as she cried. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're not alone. Not anymore. I've got you, and I'm not letting go." The doctor quietly approached, placing a hand on Henry's shoulder. "She's going to need more than medical care," he said softly. "She needs protection." Henry nodded once, slow, heavy, and filled with a new kind of resolve. "That," he whispered, "is exactly what I plan to give her." The air in the room settled into a fragile calm once Darren was escorted out, leaving only the faint beeping of monitors and the sound of Lily's uneven breaths filling the space. Henry stayed beside her, rubbing her hand gently in small circles that anchored her trembling spirit. The doctor spoke to the nurses in quiet tones, their expressions serious as they prepared the next steps. "We're issuing a temporary no-contact restriction," the doctor said softly as he approached. "Henry, given her condition and his behavior, it's medically necessary." Henry nodded, the weight of the moment solidifying his resolve like cooling steel. "Do whatever needs to be done," he replied. "She needs peace." A hospital administrator entered moments later with a clipboard, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Lawson, we'll need you to sign as her emergency contact. And we'll also file a report for hospital safety measures." Lily looked up with tired eyes, finding comfort in Henry's steady presence. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I didn't know they could do that." Henry brushed a soft hand across her forehead. "They can," he said, "and they will. You're not going through this alone anymore." The administrator gave Lily a reassuring smile. "Your health and safety come first, dear. Everything else comes second." While paperwork was filled and nurses adjusted her for, Lily drifted in and out of consciousness, exhaustion pulling at her like soft, heavy tides. Henry stepped into the hallway to give her rest, leaning heavily against the wall as the events of the last hour hit him with a delayed force. His hands trembled, slightly anger, fear, and fierce protectiveness mixing inside him like fire and gasoline. Down the hall, through the glass doors of the waiting area, he spotted Darren pacing back and forth outside the hospital. The man looked frantic now, his hands running through his hair, his posture warped by anxiety and desperation. A security guard stood a few feet away, watching him with the detached vigilance of someone who'd seen too many outbursts in one shift. Darren pressed his palms to the glass, peering inside with wild eyes as if searching for someone to blame other than himself. His voice carried through the muffled entrance as he muttered harshly to the guard, "They're turning her against me. You don't understand. I need to fix this before she does something stupid." The guard lifted an eyebrow. "Sir, she's not doing anything. You're the problem here." Darren scoffed angrily, but his voice softened in the next breath, panicked pleading. "She's my wife. She needs me. She's been impossible lately. The pregnancy messed with her head. When she calms down, she realized she overreacted." Henry's eyes narrowed, a slow-burning fury waking inside him again. He stepped closer to the glass, though Darren didn't notice. This wasn't love. This was possessiveness disguised as concern. Darren suddenly kicked the base of the glass window, frustration exploding outward in a helpless strike. The guard stepped forward immediately. "That's it," he said. "One more outburst and you'll be removed from the premises completely." Darren backed away, hands raised, breath shaking. Henry turned and walked toward the nurse's station, his decision settling in his bones with cold certainty. It was time to prepare for what came next. He approached the charge nurse, a woman with a deep sense of empathy woven into her tired smile. "Excuse me," Henry said, lowering his voice. I need to speak with someone about protecting my granddaughter after she's discharged. The nurse nodded, understanding far more than she let on. We'll connect you with our social worker, she said. She helps patients create safety plans. You're doing the right thing. Henry exhaled heavily, the first hint of relief crossing his face. Minutes later, a social worker joined him, a composed woman with calm eyes and a folder under her arm. "Mr. Lawson?" she greeted gently. "I've been briefed. Let's talk about the steps we can take." She led him to a private consultation room, where she laid out options he hadn't realized existed. Emergency protective orders, legal documentation, safe housing contacts, and mental health support for Lily. Henry listened carefully, absorbing every detail with the precision of a man studying a fire map before entering a burning building. He wasn't just protecting Lily, he was preparing to defend her future. "What about her husband?" Henry asked, voice low with controlled anger. "He needs to be restricted from coming anywhere near her." The social worker nodded. "Given the hospital's report and his behavior today, a judge will likely approve a temporary restraining order within hours." Henry sat back, exhaling deeply as a plan finally took shape. "We'll do it," he said. "All of it." While paperwork began moving behind the scenes, Henry stepped back into Lily's room. She was awake again, her breathing steadier, her eyes searching for him with a tired but peaceful expression. "Did he leave?" she whispered softly. Henry pulled a chair beside her and nodded. "He's outside, but he won't come near you again." "I'm making sure of it." Tears filled Lily's eyes, but for the first time, they weren't from fear. They were from relief. Just then, the hallway echoed with Darren's raised voice again, more frantic than before. "You can't keep me from her. I won't let you." He shouted at the guards, his tone breaking with desperation and rage. Nurses looked up in alarm, whispers spreading quickly. Henry stood from the chair, his eyes cold and resolute. "This ends tonight," he murmured. Lily grabbed his hand weakly, her voice trembling. "Grandpa, don't fight him. I just want to be safe." Henry bent down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I know, sweetheart. I'm not going to fight him." He straightened slowly, his silhouette steady in the doorway. "I'm going to end this the right way." Henry Lawson headed toward the hallway, not with violence, but with a plan sharper and more powerful than Darren could ever imagine. Henry stepped into the hallway with a quiet composure that contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding at the entrance. Nurses whispered in tense clusters. Guards maintained a vigilant stance. And Darren's agitated voice echoed through the corridor like a storm trapped inside two tight walls. His desperation had taken on a raw edge, one that crackled with the dangerous unpredictability of a man losing his grip. Darren stood near the glass automatic doors, pacing in jagged lines, his hair disheveled and eyes wide with fear and fury. "You can't do this," he shouted at a security guard. "She's my wife. She needs me." "She's confused right now." He's filling her head with lies. His voice broke dramatically, drawing the attention of patients and visitors whose faces twisted with discomfort. Henry approached slowly, each step deliberate, controlled like a seasoned firefighter stepping into a burning room, knowing panic was the real enemy. Darren spotted him instantly, his expression morphing from desperation to accusation. "You," Darren snarled, pointing a trembling finger. "You ruined everything. You turned her against me." Henry stopped several feet away, keeping a safe distance, the same way he once approached unstable structures at fire scenes. "Lily saw the truth," he said quietly. "All I did was give her space to say it." Darren's breath hitched, his eyes narrowing with wounded pride. "You think you can replace me? You think you can be her hero?" Henry shook his head, his tone calm but unwavering. "I'm not her hero," he said. "I'm her grandfather, Khan, and I'm doing what you failed to do, protecting her." Darren lunged forward not with a punch, but with a burst of anger that made the guards immediately shift. "She's my wife!" he screamed. "She belongs with me. You're twisting everything." One of the guards stepped between them, holding out a firm hand. "Sir, if you cannot calm yourself, we will escort you off hospital property." Darren's chest heaved, breath shaking with barely contained rage. "He wants to control her," he spat. "He wants to make me look like a monster, so she leaves me. You don't know what she's like. She cries over everything. She panics over nothing. I can't fix things if she won't stop being." He froze. The entire hallway stilled. Even his own voice seemed to collapse mid-sentence. Henry stepped forward, slow and steady, his eyes fixed on Darren with the weight of a man who had carried dying strangers in his arms. "Finish that sentence," Henry said quietly. "Go on. Tell the whole hospital what you think of a woman in pain." Darren's mouth tightened, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "She's dramatic," he said stubbornly. "Over-emotional. She doesn't listen. Half the time she acts like the world is ending just because she's uncomfortable." Gasps spread through the hallway like a falling line of dominoes. Even the guard looked at Darren with disbelief. Henry's eyes darkened, the room seeming to shift with the gravity of his silence. "You ignored her panic," Henry said slowly. "You dismissed her pain. And today, when she collapsed in front of you when your unborn child could have been in danger, you walked away." Darren flinched, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't care enough to find out," Henry replied. The guard stepped closer. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. You're a danger to her health and safety. We have a report filed." The mention of a report sent Darren into a tailspin, his face drained of color, fear flickering across his expression. "What report?" he demanded. "What are you talking about?" Henry lifted his chin slightly. "The hospital has filed for emergency safety protocols. Lily is under protected care." Darren's face twisted with betrayal. "You did this?" he hissed. "You think you can take my family away from me?" Henry responded with a calmness that cracked Darren's anger like thin ice. "No," he said quietly. "You did that all on your own?" Darren staggered backward, visibly shaken as the implications sank in legal actions, protective orders, hospital documentation. His voice broke as he tried to cling to anything. "I can fix this. I can talk to her. She just needs to hear me out. She needs me." Henry sighed softly, a deep, weary sound. "She needed you hours ago," he said. "And you walked away?" Darren's breath stuttered. He grabbed the side of a chair, gripping it so tightly his knuckles whitened. Panic and denial wore visibly on his face. One of the guards touched his shoulder gently but firmly. "Sir, please, come with us." Darren jerked his arm away, desperation erupting. "No, I'm not leaving without her. She's my wife." Henry's eyes sharpened. "She is a human being," he said, "not your possession." Darren opened his mouth to yell again, but suddenly stopped, his shoulders collapsing inward. He pressed his palms to his face, shaking violently as the last of his bravado shattered. When he finally lowered his hands, his voice came out small, broken. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he whispered. I didn't know what to do." Henry stared at him, seeing for the first time not a villain, but a man drowning in his own selfishness, pride, and emotional immaturity. But pity had no place here. Not today. Not when Lily's life had hung in the balance. "Go home, Darren," Henry said quietly. "For once in your life, do the right thing." Darren looked at him with hollow eyes, trembling as the guards gently redirected him toward the exit. His last words, choked and fractured, lingered in the air. "She won't leave me. She can't." But as he disappeared through the doors, escorted into the cold evening air, one truth settled across Henry's chest like a steady flame. She already had, and this time she wouldn't be alone. Henry turned back toward Lily's room, his steps steady, his resolve unshakable. With every stride, he prepared the ground for the storm that would follow. Morning light slipped through the hospital blinds in soft golden stripes as Lily rested with calmer breaths, the worst of the fear finally fading from her trembling body. Henry sat beside her bed, his hands folded, eyes watching over her with the quiet vigilance of a man who had stood guard his entire life. The storm outside the room had softened, but the battle waiting beyond these walls was only just beginning. The doctor entered with a reassuring smile, carrying a set of papers that bore the weight of life-changing decisions. "Lily," he said gently, "your vitals are improving, and the baby is stable. But for your safety, we've recommended a temporary protective order." Lily blinked slowly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes as Henry squeezed her hand, grounding her back into strength. "It means Darren cannot come near you," the doctor continued with professional calm. "Not here, not at home, not without legal consequences." Lily nodded, the smallest breath of relief escaping her lips as she leaned into the comforting truth that she finally had a barrier between herself and the fear she had been silently living with. Hours later, a hospital legal advocate joined Henry in a quiet consultation room, laying documents across the table with practiced clarity. She explained every step in calm, steady tones, how the restraining order would work, the upcoming emergency hearing, and Lily's rights as a victim of emotional neglect. Henry listened intently, absorbing every detail like a man preparing for a rescue plan he refused to let fail. Meanwhile, Darren sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the silence he had created and never learned to face. His phone lay untouched on the table beside him, buzzing with calls from his mother, from coworkers, from no one who could fix the emptiness gnawing through him. He replayed the supermarket, the hospital, Lily's whisper, her refusal to be alone with him, each memory slicing deeper than the last. He hadn't meant to hurt her. He hadn't meant to abandon her. But intent no longer mattered, not when reality had broken through pride. 2 days later, the emergency hearing was set in a small municipal courtroom, where the air buzzed with whispered tension and the faint rustle of paperwork. Henry helped Lily into the building, his arms steady around her shoulders as she walked with slow, cautious steps. The courtroom benches filled with nurses who had witnessed everything, neighbors who had seen the collapse, and quiet supporters who believed in protecting the vulnerable. Darren sat at the front, his suit wrinkled from restless nights, his eyes holding the fragile desperation of a man losing everything he thought he owned. When Lily entered, he straightened abruptly, opening his mouth, but the judge raised a hand before he could speak. "You will remain silent unless addressed," she ordered firmly. Henry guided Lily to her seat, settling beside her like an unshakable wall of strength. The judge began reviewing the hospital report, her brows tightening as she read the details. "Severe anemia," she said aloud. "Stress-induced complications. Collapse, husband left the scene." Darren flinched visibly, his jaw tightening. "Your Honor," he said shakily, "that's being exaggerated. I didn't leave her in danger. I thought she was overreacting." "She does that sometimes." A nurse in the back let out a quiet gasp as the courtroom shifted with uncomfortable disbelief. The judge lifted her gaze sharply. "Overreacting," she repeated. "That's your defense for abandoning a pregnant woman in visible distress." Darren's face crumpled, shame swallowing the flicker of defiance left in his voice. Lily took a trembling breath, then spoke softly into the microphone. "Your Honor, I begged him not to leave. I told him I was scared. He walked away while people were calling for help." Her voice cracked, and Henry placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. "Did you feel unsafe with your husband?" the judge asked gently. Lily nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Yes, I felt alone and unseen and scared." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her truth filling every corner of the room. Henry leaned forward, addressing the judge with respectful calm. "Your Honor, I've been a firefighter for 32 years. I've seen the consequences of neglect, fear, and unchecked pride. My granddaughter nearly fainted from preventable causes because the one person who should have cared didn't." Darren lowered his head, hands shaking. For the first time, he had no words. The judge closed the folder with decisive certainty. "This court issues a temporary restraining order, effective immediately," she declared. "Mr. Darren Hayes is prohibited from contacting, approaching, or interfering with the well-being of Lily Hayes. Further review will determine long-term actions." Darren's breath broke with a small, wounded sound as two officers gently approached him. He wasn't arrested, but the weight of consequences finally settled on his shoulders. He looked at Lily one last time, eyes full of regret he had no words for. But Lily didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, the sun warmed her face as Henry opened the car door for her, helping her into the seat with careful tenderness. "It's over," he whispered gently. "You're safe now." Lily exhaled a long, shaky breath, the first real breath of freedom she'd felt in months. Weeks later, Lily delivered a healthy baby girl, her cries filling the room like a soft, triumphant victory. Henry stood beside her through every contraction, every push, every frightened tear till she held her daughter in her arms for the first time, whispering, "You're safe. I promise you'll always be safe." When the nurse stepped out, Henry approached the bed slowly, eyes shining with quiet pride. "What are you going to name her?" he asked softly. Lily looked down at the tiny face nestled against her chest and smiled. "Hope," she whispered. "Because that's what saved us." Henry brushed her forehead with a gentle kiss, his voice a soft tremble. "You saved yourself," he murmured. Hope just opened the door. As the baby slept peacefully in her arms, Lily felt the weight of her past lift with every breath. Darren's shadow no longer lingered. The fear no longer controlled her. The world seemed brighter, safer, because she had chosen herself, chosen protection, chosen truth. And she had not walked that road alone. Her grandfather had stood beside her through every storm, and together they had built a life where fear could no longer thrive.